13 years, I've had the pleasure of being sort of a scientific advisor to the very much community-led reintroduction of Chch to Banks Peninsula. And usually I talk about Chch quite a bit. Usually I'm talking more about the reintroduction itself and what's happened since the reintroduction. Today I want to do something a little bit different. I'm going to share some of my thoughts on what has been kind of successful and inspiring about this particular project, for me at least, and also to explain why when people say, what are we reintroducing next, I have to kind of take a deep breath and go to my happy place. Because reintroductions are really complex. Making that decision involves a whole lot of factors, and I think that's something that's easy to forget. We do a lot of translocations in New Zealand. We have a lot of species that we would have lost entirely if it hadn't been for reintroductions and translocations. Today, especially in the last 10 years, the vast majority of reintroductions have been led by community groups. So it's become a really commonplace thing to do. And some people may think that means that it's something that's relatively easy, relatively straightforward, and the decision to do it should be quite clear. But it definitely isn't. There's a lot to consider, and it's important to get it right, because most translocations on a global scale and over time fail. So it's a very easy thing to get wrong. You need to consider carefully why you want to do it, and you need to consider what you can do to kind of stack the deck in favor of success. So a bit of background on the Chch reintroduction itself, kind of a quick run through of what happened with the project. Chch were reintroduced to the peninsula in 2009 and 2010. We had 2 translocations, one each year, and in total we moved 72 birds to Banks Peninsula. The community group had done a lot of prep work beforehand. The most important bit of that was getting Hugh Wilson to do a report looking at food availability for Chch on Banks Peninsula. And he determined that there was enough habitat, and in particular enough of their food sources across the landscape of the peninsula, that it was pretty likely that the birds would be able to survive there year-round, have that good year-round food supply they need to persist. The next thing, of course, we had to do was decide where to get Chch from. Whenever you're doing a translocation, you need to make sure you're not going to do any damage to the population you're removing the birds from. And you also want to have a population that is coming from a landscape sort of similar as you can get to the one where you're moving them to. And that's a big ask for us, because we don't have a big population of Chch anywhere near us. Ultimately, we decided to get our birds from Maud Island Scientific Reserve, which is a predator-free island in Molles Sounds. We released the birds in Hinawai Reserve, which made a lot of sense. It was, the biggest chunk of regenerating and remnant habitat we had available on the peninsula that was also accessible, available to us for the release, and close, very close to the place where Chch had persisted the longest before the breeding population disappeared 20 to 30 years ago. So here's a picture of one of the releases. The birds were transported in cat boxes, kind of ironically, but they did really well post-release. Our survival rate for the first several months, before birds started dispersing, was basically 100%. They all survived, and they all did really well, and to our surprise, they all stuck around. They hung out in Hinawai for the most part for the first few months before beginning to move out of the peninsula. Over the last decade, it's hard to believe it's been that long, we've had a huge number of resightings of birds contributed by members of the community. They're concentrated in Akaroa, both because the birds like to go there in the winter and because that's where we have a lot of people looking out for them. But overall, we've had over 10,000 reports of birds in the 10 years since the release, and about half of those are of known color-banded individuals. So it's a really phenomenal record of what has happened with these birds post-translocation. And one of the reasons we've had such good community engagement with this is because Chch are bold, they're charismatic, they're very flexible, they love coming into suburbia, and you can basically buy their loyalty by giving them sugar water, and they'll just keep coming back to people's gardens time and time again. This this set of birds from winter a few years ago are mostly unbanded. Hopefully by the end of winter, most of them were banded. But they really grabbed the imagination of people in Akaroa, and that has inspired and really been the impetus to keep the monitoring program going on as strongly as it has. 10 years on though, we're still not 100% sure that this population is going to be really secure in the long term. It hasn't gone through the roof. There aren't clouds of tui all over the peninsula, even though it's been 10 years. There are definitely lots of birds in Akaroa. There are a lot of birds in Akuti Valley. The birds go back and forth. We know birds have come to Christchurch and gone back again, but we don't have a massive increase in the population. And we don't know for sure why that is. It may just be that despite all of the regeneration on Banks Peninsula, the habitat is still marginal. We know tui can cope with a certain level of predators. You know, they're in Auckland, they're in Dunedin, they're in Wellington. They can cope with some of that, but the habitat just may not be quite good enough on a large enough scale to support really big populations. That's one theory. We still do get good numbers of birds. They've had a really good year this year. We've got lots of unbanded birds flying around in Akaroa, but it's been a lot of effort, and we're still not done yet after 10 years. And that's another sort of cautionary tale about doing reintroductions. It's a really long game, making sure that things have succeeded. It's also been a great effort in terms of both cost and people's time. The original reintroduction cost somewhere on the order of $80,000 to $90,000 just to get the birds here, and that doesn't include the time of people like me, people from other agencies, and of course the hundreds and hundreds of hours of volunteer time that have gone into the project over the year. If you calculated all of that out over the decade of the project, it would probably be close to $500,000 for returning the birds here. So it's important to think about that as a potential cost when you're trying to decide why you might want to bring birds back. And there are a whole bunch of different reasons why you might do it. Some of them are definitely related to preserving the species. So a lot of the introductions that have happened, particularly to offshore islands, have been 100% to prevent the extinction of that species. In other cases, you may be looking to boost the population size, especially if you're dealing with a threatened or at-risk species, to provide an insurance population if the species only occurs in a few areas, or to try to move the species out into a greater proportion of their former range, possibly in the hopes of ensuring that you have good coverage in a lot of different kinds of habitat, different kinds of climatic conditions, especially as the climate starts to change. You may also be wanting to reintroduce the species in order to restore some really important ecological interaction, things like pollination, seed dispersal. Overseas, this might be something like predation or decomposers if you're looking at some insects. But for tui, none of these apply. There was no reason we needed to reintroduce tui to conserve tui. There's no reason we needed to reintroduce tui to restore some kind of ecological interactions. There are other species in the habitat that are doing the jobs that tui used to do. So why would we bring them back? Because we want to. And I've used kind of, that's kind of a flip way to describe that. And that's on purpose. And one of the reasons is that from an ecological standpoint, a lot of ecologists say, if you don't have one of these reasons to reintroduce it, you shouldn't be doing it. Because it's more natural, it's more interesting to let the birds get back there on their own. And another consideration might be that if you get it wrong, and you don't do something that's sensible to be doing for the species or for the ecosystem, and you mess it up, you're killing birds. So doing it just because people want something to happen faster may not be a good reason to move birds around. But people don't just want to speed things up. It's not, sometimes there is an element of, oh, we're restoring something, we want the birds back, because that's exciting. But there are also much deeper reasons that people want birds back. And this may be a very deep spiritual or cultural connection of wanting to restore Tonga, to your area. It may be a strong sense of social responsibility to make things right and leave the world a better place. It may be a really personal sense of loss. A lot of the people involved in the TUI reintroduction remember TUI being there. They remember losing them, and it means a lot to them to have them back. So it's a valid consideration when you're trying to weigh up what is otherwise a sensible thing to do because the birds used to be there. And if you go down that path of doing a reintroduction because it's something that people want to do, the benefits can be enormous and much broader than for the species itself. And here I have a couple of quotes from people who have been really strongly involved in the reintroduction. And the message that we've been getting from people in Akaroa who are really involved in this is that it really is changing the way they look at nature. The birds are charismatic and they help people, they really connect with people. So people are connecting with the birds, people are connecting to other people because of the birds, and people are connecting to nature generally and to the wider ecosystem through the birds. The birds are great ambassadors for conservation, and they are actually changing people's behavior as far as we can tell. There's more pest control going on. This is anecdotal, but people are doing more pest control. They're planting more natives because the birds have gotten them interested in these different aspects of conservation. So that's an argument, pretty strong argument, I think, in favor of doing reintroductions because people want them to, even if there isn't another strong ecological justification for doing it. So now we go on to the what's next question, and how this might apply to doing other reintroductions in Christchurch. So we know that we have lots of regenerating forests. That's, of course, Hinatahi before fire. That's regenerating. We have a bit of a, obviously not a whole lot of habitat in the city center, but we do still get native birds coming down off the hills to visit us in the city, including bellbirds, caribou, in some cases breeding in places like Christchurch and in the Botanic Gardens. So we know that even the city can support, at least to a small degree, some of these species, and certainly we would expect big bush areas on the Port Hills to be able to support some of these species. So what are some of the candidates? Here's a little selection of some of the species that people have mentioned at one time or another to me personally, or things that I've read. They range from, say, brown creepers, which already exist. They're already in plenty of areas around Banks Peninsula, but not on the Port Hills. Fernbirds, mohua, shearwaters, specifically in reference to Pueo Island, potentially. Kiwi, we have a few different kiwi species actually that, from an evolutionary ecological standpoint, would make sense to return to Banks Peninsula. South Island robins, weka, of course, are appropriate species of weka is kind of marooned on the Chathams. Kapa and kakariki. If we want to consider looking at reintroducing these or any other species, there's a whole long list of questions that really need to be carefully considered while you're making that decision. And the first and most important thing to think about is, have you fixed the problem? Your species is gone for a reason. It's probably gone for several reasons. And if you haven't fixed the problem well enough, your reintroduction is going to fail. It doesn't mean you need to solve every problem, and you don't need to solve every problem 100% for every species you want to reintroduce. But for some species, you're going to have to get really close before you can be confident your reintroduction is going to succeed. And you need to know what that is the case for. You also have to think a lot about the species track record. It may be looking looking at what the species track record is like success in landscapes similar to yours. So for example, with tui, we knew that they could exist in cities. We knew they could do well enough in areas with the kind of patchwork landscape that we have on the peninsula. You need to know how well they can do in the presence of predators, and not just predators generally, but specific predators. If we're thinking about things like weka and kiwi, for example, sure, we could get rid of stoats, possums, rats, maybe with a really intensive predator control program, but what are we going to do about dogs right next to a city? It's also good, if you can, to look at how they've done in previous translocation attempts. Some species have not really been moved around much at all. Others have, been moved many times, but it's never really taken. And other species, like robins, are a great example. You move them around and they seem to do great. They're relatively easy to translocate. And you also have to look at some of the specific characteristics of your species. Hole nesters, really vulnerable to predators. Your predator control program is going to have to be really, really intensive and successful in order to give them adequate protection. Do they have a flexible diet? Can they move around to find the kind of food they want to eat and throughout the year? Are they going to leave the area you want them to stay in and go and try to nest and feed in areas that are unsafe? Do they need to hang out with friends? A lot of birds need to be in big flocks in order to survive well, which means you need even bigger areas for them to have the space to survive. And you also have to think down the track, and if these birds become abundant, are they going to start doing things that really annoy people? Are they going to raid vineyards and fruit trees? Are they going to dig up people's gardens? Are they going to shout at each other at all hours of the night? Are they going to start ripping up people's cladding? Wellington is starting to see some of these issues, and if you are thinking down the track and looking at whether or not these things are likely to turn people against your translocation, it's an important consideration. And I also have, does your species have charisma down there, which might seem like kind of an odd thing to mention, but if you're reintroducing a species because people want them, you want it to be a species that people are going to see and appreciate and enjoy, because you're going to need the financial support, you're going to need the monitoring support, and if they start doing annoying things, you're just going to need the support generally to keep the effort going for that 10 years plus that it's going to take to get a translocation really secure. So I've just put this up again to remind you that the answers to all of those questions are going to be different for each of these species. I'm not going to tell you straight off which ones of these I think are the best potential options for Christchurch, but I'm sure that over the next few years, as more predator control work and more habitat restoration work gets underway, as a community we'll be starting to have more of these discussions. And I'd like to finish by thanking a number of the different organizations and some funders that have helped support the translocation, and a small subset of the many residents and other community members who've been providing the information and the feedback and all the support for this work over the last decade.